Hey everybody, welcome to, what are we on? I guess we're in week 11 of the course. Congratulations. If you've managed to keep up with the reading, you should have completed reading all of Silko's Almanac of the Dead for last week in week 10. I hope you all had a good spring break back there a couple of weeks back. At this point, what we're going to do for this week, this is RT, this is Robert Thomas, he's my buddy. Um, anyway, for this week, you don't have a reading necessarily. I want us to watch a couple of films. The films will be posted up in it's under the viewing material tab on the left-hand side on Blackboard. Two films we're going to watch. The first film called Frozen River, and then the second film will be called The Golden Dream. Two very different films made. Frozen River, I'd have to look it up. I know the film was made back in the mid '90s. It's an interesting film that is a dramatic Hollywood portrayal, but a low budget film, and it has to deal with the U.S. Canadian border and a very unique situation on the U.S. Canadian border, which happens to occur. Near the on Cornwall Island in the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Mohawk tribe of that their reservation essentially straddles Akwesasne and Gotnawage and St. Regis, essentially straddle the U.S. Canadian border. And so the tribes, the Mohawks especially, but all of the Six Nations Iroquois or Haudenosaunee, the Gotnarage, Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, Oneidas, Onondagas, and the St. Regis folks, right? And the St. Regis Mohawks. So Tuscaroras, excuse me, are the Six Nations Iroquois, and they have a very unique situation in northern Canada across the St. Lawrence Seaway, in that their treaty has them to be able to have free rights of passage across an international border. A couple of hundred years ago when the treaty was signed, that's not such a big deal. And fast forward to 2017, or when this particular film was made, Frozen River, in the mid 1990s, then that border is now, and the right to have free passage, legal right of free passage across an international border, you can only imagine what that has sort of the types of issues that may present in the modern times. And so these two films, the film Frozen River talks about what that relationship means and the ability to sort of cross that line or cross that border, in much the same way that we saw this same issue coming back up in Almanac of the Dead over and over and over again. And I'm going to withhold a conversation or discussion of Almanac of the Dead or the end of Almanac of the Dead until next week, because I want us to watch the films and then come back and talk about the films within the context of the movie. So with Frozen River, you see this idea of crossing this border, but it's one in which you'll see in that the power relationships are different than what we normally associate between the United States and United States citizens and crossing borders and going into Canada. And so the power and in this particular film, Frozen River, it's a film that brings gender issues to the forefront, class issues to the forefront, race issues to the forefront, legal issues to the forefront, treaty rights in some ways to the forefront, and then internationalizes that in some way in a dramatic film. And it's very subdued. I hope you enjoyed it. I always found it to be an interesting low-budget film that addresses a lot of pretty interesting intersections of issues, many of which we've talked about in Almanac of the Dead. The next film is Golden Dream. Golden Dream is absolutely fascinating. I saw it for the first time in the theater at UW Cinematheque. It blew me away when I saw it. I was completely awestruck at the end of the film. I don't think I have seen a film since, and I don't think I ever saw a film before this one that quite encapsulates what indigeneity means to the middle of Turtle Island. And by Turtle Island, I mean both North and South America and then that strip of land in between. All of these lands have always been connected until we cut a canal, until the U.S. cut a canal across Panama. But that's a man-made intersection. These islands have always been connected. In fact, it's not islands, it's not continents, it's in fact, in many ways, one continent. And it's not three Americas, it's essentially one place. And it's always sort of been referred to as Turtle Island. And I have never seen a film in all of my years of viewing native films. And I'm 51 years of age now, and I've been viewing native films probably for 46 years, if not longer, right? My entire life I've been viewing native films, and I've never seen one. And in the past 30 years, I've really begun to look at native films very closely and critically think about them. And I've never seen a film that quite encapsulates indigeneity and everything that indigeneity faces in order to exist in this world. And both the physical existence within human beings and the cultural existence, and that's there sort of in our heads, these ideas, and then within legal, right, and then everything that sort of spins out from that. I've never seen a film that captures what I think all the various things that face indigeneity in order for it to exist in the world, in order for it to have survived against one of the most destructive and violent forces, right, of economic and militaristic and cultural forces, right? Everything that was supposed to have extinguished indigeneity on Turtle Island, it's managed to survive. And that alone is a complete feat of the human will in order to survive. And we see this play out in this film, and we see it play out in the very simple lives, I shouldn't say simple, in the very complex and very real lives of the struggle to remain indigenous. And we see that play out in these three characters within the film, and it's absolutely fascinating. It is a film that deals with violence, right? But in a very particular way. And so it's all in subtitles. Please watch it. The Golden Dream and The Frozen River. And then if you're curious about The Frozen River, there's also another film there within the viewing materials called Oka, 270 Years of Resistance. I strongly suggest that you maybe take a look at that documentary film if you've got another 2.5 hours of film viewing in you this week. But if not, then at some point. And I think, I won't do it, but I may do it by the end of the semester. There's another really good film called Lighting the Seventh Fire. That's about the fishing rights controversy in the beginning in the 70s and then the 80s, and then in the 90s it really came to a head within Wisconsin. And I may save that film because that's a tough documentary to watch, and I think it's one that we would really need to sort of work together because it's set in Wisconsin and it deals with anti-Indian sentiment in Wisconsin, and I think that's one that needs a discussion. I would feel much more comfortable in us showing that film and talking about it face to face, but we'll see how we get towards the end of the semester. But certainly for this week, you need to watch Frozen River and you need to watch The Golden Dream. And then if you want some background information on the Frozen River, I would suggest that you watch the Crisis at Oka, the Oka, the 270 Years of Resistance. It's at Ganasataki. Ganasataki, 270 Years of Resistance. Okay, so we've said a lot here. I wanted to back up though and talk about this idea of violence because we've seen in reading Silko, we've seen these extreme levels of violence of indigeneity, and then how that violence has sort of been internationalized and spread out across the globe. And so I think in some ways the Golden Dream deeply anticipated or who knows what the relationship is between the film and the novel, but I think certainly there's a strong relationship between the two and how they sort of deal with the violence. In many ways, most of us who sort of live here within, the belly of a major imperial force in the world, which is the United States, we are we live in the belly of the largest empire, one of the most powerful empires within the world, with a great sphere of influence, and we oftentimes don't understand the struggles which happen very closely around us. I think we're seeing more and more every day those struggles begin to sort of affect our lives more and more. But there was a time when we could sort of view that violence and view that conflict from afar and feel as though, that's really terrible, but this doesn't really affect me in any kind of meaningful way. And in that way, we're kind of like Sterling within the novel of Almanac of the Dead. And I want to thank, Lindsay, I know your first name's Lindsay. I can't think of your last name, but look at the discussion. The first one who posted it on week 10 where you trace this idea of violence across the novel. And I've been thinking about it for several days since then, because this is how we take apart literature. We trace an idea across a body of work or across a bodies of works, and then we begin to see how each work represents that idea differently, or how we may interpret each work's representation of that idea differently. And then we can argue about the interpretations all day long. But we have to base those interpretations on evidence. And so if we trace violence across the novel, many of the characters within the novel engage in acts of violence, right? Deal with violence in many ways. But Sterling is a very interesting character in that he doesn't actually engage in violence, but he's fascinated by it. And he gets to study and look at it from a distance because he's reading about it in like pulp fiction, and he's reading about violence and crime and like serial crime dramas, right? Sterling is the reader within the novel. Sterling is the one who's reading everybody within the novel. And in that way, we begin to inhabit a space much like Sterling as the reader of the novel, right? As the reader, we begin to we exist in that space in a very particular way because we're there to make meaning. In the same way, one might argue that when Almanac of the Dead, I would argue anyway, in my interpretation of violence and how Sterling lives vicariously through the violent acts of others and through the violent acts of criminals from history and from the violent acts of this place. Many of us, right, in our everyday lives, we continue to read the stories of that violence as we lead our current contemporary lives. If you look out on the Standing Rock, if you look out anywhere where indigenous populations are standing up for their rights, they're standing up in these narratives of the violent story that was 500 years of the colonization of Turtle Island, of this imperial forceful wave washing across and forever and forever changing, right? The landscape, and forever changing the people, and forever changing the history. But you get this sense within the novel that as we continue to sort of read through that in our very real lives today, we inhabit a very similar space like Sterling within the novel. And so we, in fact, are Sterling. We, in fact, in some house, though none of us are Laguna, in some way, we inhabit the novel from maybe this particular Laguna space, right? At least we get to view it for a little while in that space. Anyway, that's what I've got for Almanac of the Dead. Thanks for putting up with me. This has been kind of a long video, much longer than I intended it to go. As always, any questions, let me know. I've noticed participation has fallen off quite a bit in discussions. Please, step back in. This class is set up to where we may change up what's going on in discussions in these last 5 weeks. Eventually, if you have not purchased Potiki, you'll need to purchase it because we'll begin reading it beginning in week 12. Week 11, we're going to watch the films. Weeks 12, 13, 14, we will be reading Potiki. We might even go into week 15 with that. So pick up that book and get ready to read it. Much shorter work, a couple hundred pages, and we're going to shift our focus quite a bit. So we may change our discussions up a little bit going forward. We'll see. So pay attention to the discussion instructions every week because those may be changing because there seems to be a fall off. But for those of you who've fallen off, there's still time to catch up. Write to me and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you catch up. All right. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Yeah. Watch though.